Okay, hello, good evening, good morning, and welcome to the Malandros game for the inaugural Gauntlet Con. Here's what's going to happen. I will briefly start by introducing the broad thing of the setting, so the situation that you guys are living, your characters are living in. And then a bit about, content and tone, choosing the player characters from the set that we have, connect them to each other with the little relationship network thing that we're doing, and then we start the game. There are 12 player characters, and they all have connections to each other, which seemed like a great idea until I found myself filling out a 12 by 12 grid of character relationships. But it's done now, so you can choose anything you want from that, and they will all intersect. So while I'm blathering on about Rio de Janeiro in the 19th century, you could also be flicking through that. When you do flick through that, if you look at the three key things about each character, are that top paragraph saying briefly who they are, then the desire is a sort of broadly stated thing that motivates them at all times, and the dramatic poles are two conflicting identities that they have. In a normal game, that's part of how you get experience points and stuff at the end of a session. You ask yourself, did I embody one or both of these? And if yes, you get an XP. But in this case, it's just good for, if you're not sure what to do next, look at that bit of the sheet and that will guide you. Okay, so this is where you live, the bustling city of Rio de Janeiro. Just last year, Princess Isabel, the Crown Princess, abolished slavery by proclaiming the Lei Aurea, the Golden Law, finally formally abolished slavery in all of the Brazilian Empire. And Rio is the capital of Brazil at this time and the biggest city. It's full of impressive modern architecture of its day. It's packed with bustling commerce, mainly in coffee, rubber, sugar, cotton, things like that. There's also a big fishing trade, and so that's also a big part of the people that you'll meet around the town. And it's also a cultural centre, so music is a big deal. Rich people go to fancy balls that are much like those that you would see amongst the great and good in Europe. Samba has not yet been invented, but its predecessor, Coro, is around, which is a kind of fast, joyous, improvisational style. And there's a dance that goes with that called the machixe, sometimes known as the Brazilian tango. And from Portugal, you also have fado music, which is mournful and full of yearning, or saudade, as they call it. Rio is also a city of churches. Well, there are not that many parishes per se, but every parish has a church, and many kind of groups will have their own churches as well. So you'll see there's, one for soldiers, or there'll be like a fisherman's association. They'd also have a chapel or a church somewhere. So there's one on every street, almost with no exceptions. Everyone in town is at least a little bit Catholic. However, but mostly hidden from view if you're just walking around the streets, the descendants of Africans brought to Brazil as slaves practice a variety of religious things, collectively known as macumba, which is a pejorative word that means effectively witchcraft. And where the church has priests, these groups have, or mais de santos, mothers of the saints. These are women who communicate with the orishas, the divine spirits of the world. The other distinctive thing in Rio at this time are the maltas. These are street gangs, largely affiliated with capoeira nations. They practice that martial art. There's the Nagoas and the Guaiamuns, who are divided not on any particular ethnic or ideological grounds, but simply that they're two different factions. The Nagoas' colour is white, the Guaiamuns is red, and each of the maltas holds a particular bit of territory, and they fight over it. That's that. They're also known to sometimes go a bit wild. They'll do things like disrupting military parades with insolent acrobatics, or sometimes just slashing people with razors in the marketplace because they feel like it. Capoeira itself was developed by African slaves. There are many different kinds. The ones that you might be familiar with today has its roots in Bahia, far to the north of here. Carioca capoeira was much more, gang-related. So the straight razor, the navalha, is a traditional weapon for it. And although it does have some of game and dance elements, it's just as often a fight. And though it's not illegal yet, being known to practice capoeira will get you thrown in jail on like a public disorder charge, something like that. They'll find something. And race is a big deal. So no one can be a slave anymore, but black children have little or no access to education. Black adults have very little access to anything but low-status jobs. And meanwhile, there are lots of immigrants that have come to Rio, mostly from Italy and Portugal, but from the Levant and elsewhere as well. And they don't exactly get a fair shake of it either. There's a white Brazilian elite that controls a lot of things. And there are exceptions, black and mixed race politicians and engineers, artists who are famous, but they are exceptions. Malandros and Malandragem. Maybe we don't need to go too much into this, but suffice to say that the at least one or more of your characters will probably be considered a malandro or a bad boy, bad girl by society at large, even if they don't really do anything to deserve that title. But the classic malandro is a kind of figure a bit like, well, actually Top Cat is a really good example, a sort of well-dressed scoundrel who always stays one step ahead of not just the law, but society's rules. We can come to that later, but there's a big range. If you're poor, you probably live in a cortiço, which is a tenement built around a courtyard. And if you're rich, then maybe you live in a townhouse or something like that. But we'll kind of come up with some things about our neighborhood as we create connections between our characters. Okay, any questions about that bit, actually, before I go on? So, aim and tone. This game is mainly about your character's emotional ties and how they're going to change. Everyone wants something. In general, that's their big desire. Specifically, they want things from each other. We'll come to that in a moment. And we're going to find out who gets what they want and who doesn't. This is often a laid-back kind of game. You might spend a lot of time just hanging out, chatting, meeting each other for coffee, buying dresses, going to parties. And then typically, something happens where someone takes an unexpected turn off the beaten path and everything becomes unstable all of a sudden. But that being said about the laid back thing, because this is a one shot, and actually when playing this game in general, don't be afraid to go directly and quickly to scenes that will address your desires and your motivations, because there's loads of material and you should never fear things happening too soon, because whatever happens, there will be repercussions and that will change the situation. In terms of, I guess, tone and content, it's not a game about violence, but Rio in this time, violence is always possible in the background. The police are brutal, the gang fights and razor slashings, as I mentioned. And the fact that slavery was a thing until, last year, your friend's father could have owned your father, that kind of thing. And slavery is nothing if not systematic violence. Although if you choose a character who's proficient in fighting as well, things may lean more in that direction, so that's the thing. More seriously, it is likely that racism will be shown or referred to. I don't think you would, but just to be clear, I ask that people refrain from the kind of offensive language or slurs that we would associate with historical racism or current racism in English, or in Portuguese if you know it, don't say that either. Because we're effectively playing in translation, we can make clear someone's meaning without resorting to crossing lines in that direction. And finally, the X card is in play, as is standard for the Gauntlet, so if you find anything disturbing or upsetting in a way that is not fun, say X card or signal it like this, or somehow we'll stop, we'll find another way forward, and importantly, no questions asked if someone does that. Accept it and we backtrack a little bit and find a different route forward. So I can talk less now. Does anyone have a character they would like to play?
I want to play Mama Fonseca.
That is a fine choice.
Owner and manager of the most popular food and beverage establishment in the neighborhood.
Cool.
I like Biago, the capoeirista.
Cool.
I'm imagining her as like an Al Swearingen on Deadwood type. Is that fair?
That's cool. Like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Is that like her vibe?
Yeah. Well, I mean, not necessarily, but it is now.
Not like the murder and cruelty, but like the community part, right?
That part, definitely. Yeah. The pigs out the back. Well, that was the laundry place, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. But the more like community anchor type, like one.
Yeah. Exactly. That's exactly. So I've also added your kind of little special move down the bottom right in each case.
I like Antonio Fortunata, one of the two of them, and I think I'd rather do Antonio, I think.
Yep, you want to be Antonio? And David, a preference?
I think I'll play Fortunata.
Oh, that's good. It's always nice to have family ties.
And 2 upper class and 2 lower class too, which is interesting.
So yeah, these are mostly ready to go. I've taken the liberty of choosing all your ability scores and one kind of signature move, all that kind of stuff. But what has not yet been determined is kind of the most important part of group character creation in this game, which is at the bottom of each sheet is a list of everyone. And in each case, there's a relationship. So I'm looking at Antonio's right now. So for Fortunata, the relationship is simply she's my little sister. And you'll see that the what I want, these are all either entirely or initially, they're about an emotional response that you want from that person. And sometimes they have a specific thing that you want them to do. But in each case, you can't have it, or at least not right now. Tell the other character what you want from them. And this is a sort of meta conversation, because you're perhaps not aware of this yourself, but it's useful to know. And they will tell you why you cannot have that thing. So for example, to use a character that's not in this, Antonio wants from Aranya, his sister's maid, subservience because he does not like her attitude, right? And then she might say, well, you can't have that because I don't actually respect you. I just think you're a kind of a tool. And that would be it. So then if he wants her subservience or to somehow change her mind, he's got to think of how to make that happen. And that then is what drives the scenes that you'll have together. Does that make sense? David, would you find the first person, I guess, alphabetically on your list and tell them what's up?
Tiago, I see him playing Capoeira.
Yeah.
And what I want, romance. He's exciting and forbidden. And then the next one is Antonio, and he is my older brother, and what I want is respect. And then Mama Fonseca, she's relationships, she's someone to look up to, and what I want, respect again as a capable person. So a slightly different kind of respect, perhaps.
Well, Tiago, why can't she get that from you?
I think you're not the first sort of upper class woman that's fallen for him. He is nice looking, but one of the things I really liked about him was on this picture he's got these like nasty looking scars running up and down his face, his cheeks there. So I think he's been like severely punished for getting in relationships he shouldn't be in before. So I think he's just afraid.
That sounds fair.
That's solid. Antonio.
I imagine that I've always seen you as sort of frivolous, and I think you make bad choices both with your heart and with like your time. You should be a proper young lady out there finding the right sort of men, engaging in the right sort of things. And I just don't think you do that. I need to keep an eye on you all the time, because if I don't, you can just be a little flighty or make ill choices.
And then finally, Mama Fonseca. Why do you not respect her as a capable person?
I think it's pretty simple. I think I just view you as very like pampered and spoiled, and having had everything done to you or done for you, your whole life. That's the general thing. But specifically, I think the reason why I don't respect you as a capable person is I think you were supposed to help me get a really important loan that I needed, and you promised you could help me with this, and you failed.
All right, let's then move on to Jason. Yeah, so Mama Fonseca. Maybe just say them one at a time, and we'll have them answer immediately, because it's easy to forget what the thing was if you wait.
Yeah, I kind of like jotted mine down really quickly when David said it. Okay, so let's go in order here. Tiago's the capoeirista, right? Or the capoeirista. He's my son-in-law.
Yeah, I was sort of discovering more information about the character as I looked at things.
What I want from Tiago is obedience. It's time to settle down. Why can't I have this?
You have a very successful business going. It's a restaurant, right?
Food and beverage. Yeah.
It's really popular, and I think you've raised your daughter with, even here in us being in the lower class, I think you've raised your daughter with a lifestyle that I don't feel like I can provide just on my actual skills, or going out and get manual labor or something like that. So until I can find some other source for that sort of stability. Like, I'm going to keep going out with gangs and doing illegal things because it pays better. It keeps her sort of satisfied with the life that she has. And I'm looking for something better, but haven't found it yet.
Let's quickly decide what your wife and your daughter's name is. I think that might be important. Any thoughts?
Maybe just like Maria. Is that
Yeah.
Portuguese appropriate?
That's like almost everyone in Portugal has got Maria somewhere in their name, sometimes within the men. Yes. All right. I guess Antonio is probably next.
I rent my place from him. And what I want is reassurance that I won't be turfed out, which I assume means like that I won't be have my place sold to sold to a more lucrative thing or rented to a more lucrative.
I think that you're such a fixture of the neighborhood that's garnered you a certain amount of power and influence. And I don't think you always show me the proper respect that I expect. People come to you, show you so much respect, but then in turn, you don't show me the proper respect as a landlord and, of course, as an upper-class gentleman.
That's solid. Depressing, but solid. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, that's good. Awesome. And then that leaves Fortunata. She's a big spender, but annoying. And what I want is respect for me and my regulars.
I think it's because we misunderstand one another. And I don't think that I know what it would mean to be respectful of you or your regulars.
Yeah, you just don't get it. Okay, good. Just complete obliviousness.
This is dramatic gold. Great. Cool. Patrick.
Fortunata, who I have turned down her advances, not because I'm married.
No.
Because I totally forgot that when she was looking at me. But relationship is I see her watching me sometimes. And what I want is respect. I'm a person, not a zoo animal. But I do think that ties back to that previous relationship. She just saw me as a toy, a pretty thing. And when trouble came up, she was not willing to protect me at all. So if I'm going to go down that road again, I want you to actually see me as a person.
It's the same kind of thing that I had with Mama. It's just like, I don't know what it means in your culture to respect you. So I don't think that I'm ever doing it quite right.
She's just raw privilege. I kind of love it. Like,
yeah,
you're like raw privilege. Like
writing that in my notes. Raw privilege. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the answer here.
Okay. For Antonio, relationship is I robbed him one night. So that's fun.
So much in here I've forgotten I'd written. But yeah.
And what I want, and I can't imagine why you wouldn't want this as well, is for you to suffer for your greed.
I think that the reason I can't give that to you is that the premise itself is wrong. Greed does not deserve to be suffered for. I have received what I have because of my station and because of who I am. That isn't something worthy of being punished for. The Lord has given it to me, and it is only the Lord's to decide who is punished.
Antonio and Fortunata are the literal fucking worst.
So just a wildly different sort of moral spectrum there. Like it's not the ignorance or ambivalence of Fortunata. It's we just actively believe the world works differently. Mama Fonseca, she's my wife's mother, and what I want is for her to think that I'm good enough.
I think the reason why I don't give you that is because I had a very messy, torrid affair with your father when he was younger.
Hey.
And the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, baby. That's what.
Oh, and I love the just like flirting with incestuous nature sort of thing there.
When we were younger, I think I had a thing with your father, and he turned out to be just a loser. And I think.
No, yeah. It's just like we're repeating that pattern, probably not even knowing about that relationship.
Possibly. Oh yeah, that's pretty good. I like that. I like the idea like you don't actually know. That's why I think that about you. So.
Like, you would never like admit to that, especially to me, I think.
Yeah, that's solid. Cool. And then let's go to Antonio and his.
All right, Thiago. He helps with vote rigging, and I want respect from him because I'm a reformer. I'm out there trying to change the system. And obviously, if I'm doing it, I'm trying to change it for the better. So respect as a political reformer.
If it helps, I should maybe what that would mean. So you'd be there, like helping to intimidate opposition voters on polling day, ballot stuffing, and also kind of shouting down other politicians when they give speeches and kind of knocking over their stages. Kind of really, really basic stuff like that.
So I'm just I'm trying to work through what particular reason would cause me to not respect him for this. When you hired me, convinced me to start doing this for you, basically, I think you had almost gotten my respect. Like, I feel like you gave a really good speech. Like, you were really convincing in how much you wanted to go in and change things. But I'm not educated, but I'm not dumb. And we've been doing this for a little while. And I've seen sort of the results of the things that you work really hard to get illegally passed are really helpful for people like you and Fortunata. And they're not particularly helpful for me or my wife or Mama Fonseca or anyone else here out on the street.
You don't understand trickle-down economics.
Oh, Jesus.
I'm just going to note this as talk's a good game, I think. But
yeah.
You've discovered that I'm just not really reforming to help the people. Okay.
Yeah, I've stopped believing in the reform that you're looking for.
Fortunata, she's my little sister, and I want her obedience and for her to steer clear of these proles. Being amongst these lower classes, they have their uses, but it's not spending your time with them.
You can't have that because I'm on their side in all of this. I believe in them and that they are, the people that we should be looking out for. Now, I don't necessarily know what that means, but I believe it, God damn it.
Yeah, I think there's a great big asterisk on that statement. So.
Is there an element of you feel that way just because I feel the opposite? Do we have that little bit of a relationship?
I probably am just contra to whatever your stake is in most things, but I think it runs probably deeper than It's just because that. I think there's more there, but
okay. Excellent. And Mama Fonseca, she leases her premises from me, and I want respect from her as a proper tenant, for her to recognize who I am and the respect I deserve.
I like the idea of you having done something in the past that I haven't forgiven you for. But I'm trying to think what that might be.
Or maybe about a secret weakness of his, perhaps, or vice.
That's perfect. You can't have that because what would have been the drug of choice back then?
Laudanum, maybe?
Laudanum.
Or I think you're a laudanum addict. And
or opium. I mean, your choice.
Oh, opium sounds good too. Opium would be more fun than laudanum, I think.
Yeah,
I agree.
Laudanum just leaves you lying.
Laudanum's a sort of private debilitating addiction, right? Opium's a little more
social at 5.
It's great at a party.
Okay, so because you know that I frequent the opium den sort of things, and so okay.
You're not what you say you are, essentially.
Do you have any shame of that, or is that just something you do and you're every man is allowed his vice?
It's probably very much that every man is allowed his vice, but I also probably wouldn't. The fact that I kind of need it is something I would be embarrassed by. The fact I do it would not be an embarrassment.
That's quite the tangled web, and I really love it already. This is one of those games where you take it in turns to call scenes. It's done randomly for you, but not for me. So I've written down your characters' names on 4 cards, and so they'll come out in a random order. And then each time when everyone's had a go, then it's my turn to call a scene as the GM. When it's your turn, you have to tell everyone who is in the scene, which includes other people's characters if you want. And if they don't like it, for various reasons, there are procedures for dealing with that. But you say the whole thing first. Where and when it takes place, and broadly what is happening. Just like you would in any role-playing game. But the fact is that that responsibility passes around the table. When you do that, your character must also have a goal in mind, why they are doing whatever they're doing in the scene. And you don't necessarily have to say what that is beforehand. You can, or even know what it is beforehand sometimes, right? You just sort of figure out, like, what did I really want from that conversation? Oh, that, for example. But it can be useful to say so just up front, to make, so everyone's on the same page. And sometimes it's just pretty obvious. If you are going to talk to someone or otherwise interact with them, and it's a player, character, or a significant, whatever that means, NPC, and you want an emotional response from them, so any of those things on your what I want lists, or favor, or a show of obedience, or just some sign of friendship from them, anything like that, that's what's called a dramatic scene. We'll come to what that means in a second. If you're pursuing a practical, concrete goal, like what happens in most role-playing games, picking a lock, fighting an orc, or more likely in this case, picking a lock, fighting a policeman, that is called a procedural scene. And it won't always be clear which of those two things it's going to be when you first call it. And that's okay. We'll just figure it out as it emerges. If when your turn is called, you can't think of anything right away, that is fine. Just take a moment to think about it. Look at your desire, your dramatic pose for inspiration, or you can ask people for help. And if it's not your turn to call the scene, and I have found this is important, you have to wait until the scene caller asks for help before you can offer advice. And I would explain why that's important, but it would take too long, and it's a bit boring. So, dramatic scenes, mainly they're just conversations. Maybe you could do some kind of flirting via ballroom dance thing or something, but generally they're just talking. When you get what you want emotionally, and that's important, from another player's character, or my character, in a dramatic scene, you give that player a drama token. And we don't have any of those each at the moment, but we will. If they don't give you what you want, they have to give a drama token to you. So let's give an example. Let's say, Antonio wants obedience from Fortunata. He says, you must attend this particular event. And she says, okay. Then Antonio gives a drama token to Fortunata. If she refuses, thus not giving him the obedience he wants, then the drama token goes the other way. And what those tokens are for is forcing an emotional concession. You can spend 2 at a time, just give it to the other player to force them to make that emotional concession. They can still withhold something of what you're after. So, for example, if you want someone to be afraid of you and therefore perhaps rob a bank on your behalf, and they say no, you can spend a force to make them at least show that fear, and maybe they'll help you out in some way because they're afraid of you, but they won't necessarily do the whole stick up. You can block that happening by spending 3 drama tokens. So that's a thing to think about. However, in practice, it's generally better to, I find, not plan too much ahead about how you're going to spend your tokens, but just look down and check how many you have when you find yourself at a crucial point. Importantly, if you want to force someone to do something or block it, other player characters who are also in that scene can help you with their tokens, so you can kind of pool your resources.
I want something, I spend the 1 to ask for it. Do I then spend 2 more to force it, or is it 1 more to force it?
So it's 1 more to force it, because when you first ask, you're not spending anything.
Gotcha.
You only do that exchange once it becomes clear that you've got it or you haven't got it. Great question, thank you.
When you're doing just that basic level of ask and acceptance or denial, if you deny, do you have to have point to pay to them, or is that like a phantom point sort of thing?
It's a phantom point. So basically, if you have 0 points and it's the standard one, those tokens emerge from an infinitesimal kitty that we have off the table. That's how they get introduced into circulation.
These relationships that we formed to begin with, and these wants and reasons you cannot have it, those are dynamic, right? Like those things can change as we advance the story.
Exactly. I mean, if you, as soon as you get something you want, I mean, maybe you won't get a new thing to want from that particular person, but yeah, it's like that's an initial setup. We'll see how these things pan out. Procedural scenes, although let's be honest, that's less fun. When you do a thing, you roll a single d6, and you'll notice that you have abilities with numbers next to them on your character sheet, and also 1 resource which has the number 2 next to it. which is like an item or some other kind of thing you have that can be used in the same way. But I'll speak generally of abilities to avoid confusion. If you want, when you roll that die, you can add your rating and a relevant ability to it, but you have to say so first. Like, I'm going to add my enduring to this, or I'm going to add my talking skill to this, whatever. And you add the whole amount right there, but you then cross it out on your character sheet, and you can't use it again until you refresh the ability in a later scene. So, for example, if I say go ahead and roll enduring, you could just roll the d6. You could choose to add your enduring if it's available. Generally, 2 or less is a failure, 3 to 5 is a success with drawbacks, and a 6 or more is a complete success. This 3-part scheme may seem familiar to you. Those of you who have played, I don't know, let's say Apocalypse World.
Played a system this game is definitely not based on. Right?
That's right. Yeah. There's also a thing called Ashe, which some events will generate. And when you have Ashe, which is a traditional African theological concept, which again, I won't go too much into detail about right now, unless that conversation happens in the game. But in mechanical terms, it means if you didn't like the first result, you can re-roll it and keep whichever was the higher. And then refreshing abilities. So when you've used an ability, you then later on, you're going to have another chance to call a scene. And you just need to do something that would need to be a dramatic scene, or the secret kind of third scene I'll mention in a second. You're not doing any die rolling. And it's sort of in a scenario where you might replenish your power. So, for example, if it's the knowing ability, you might begin a scene that's going to be a conversation with someone, but you're sitting there reading the newspaper as we open the scene, and that's kind of showing you're refreshing your knowing ability. Or a fighting refresh might start at a boxing gym, and then you come over to the side and drink some water, and you talk to whoever you're talking to, that kind of thing. And yeah, very briefly, the secret third scene that doesn't fit into the schema that well is called an establishment scene, and that's just you use your slot to kind of establish a fact. So to give an example from a real game that I ran, one character wanted to just go check out at this suspicious person's house to see what it was like. And there was no conflict there. They weren't really trying to do it secretly, but they also they weren't meeting anyone. So that's just what they did. They got the train, they got off, they looked at the house, they saw what it was like, scene over. And you can use those to refresh your abilities as well. Does that all make sense? Any questions on that?
Signature moves, do they cross off an ability, or do they cross off or anything like that?
If it involves a roll, so like Mama's Fonseca says, roll business, she's got a business skill, that's always an option. You can choose not to spend the ability, or you might just not have it available because you've already used it, in which case you just roll the d6. But it's always optional to use.
So if your signature move calls for an ability roll, you can still just roll a flat d6?
Exactly.
Cool.
And actually, I think, Fortunata, you have a classic start of session move. Would you like to roll that now? And then when we come back, we'll start with the first actual scenes. Is that okay? Beginning of the episode, you roll wealthy. You have a wealthy skill too. You'll notice that you don't have any actual wealth, but you have an ability of being wealthy, which precludes the need to actually spend money sometimes.
Interesting.
We're very true to life, I find. So you can choose to use that and cross off to take that bonus if you want on this roll, or you can roll a flat d6 as you choose.
I'll roll a flat d6.
Okay.
And it's plus my wealthy stat, so I have a 6.
Okay, 6. Oh, you simply gain wealth. So if you want to put a little mark in one of those White Wolf style circles on the bottom left there, wealth is a kind of abstraction of how money works in this, which we can address when someone needs to spend some cash. But yes, you've avoided any unfortunate entanglements, so no worries. So as the GM, it falls to me, and indeed is my privilege and right to call the first scene. So I'm going to be set at the big house on the square, Praça São Roque, and Barbara the nanny will be in it along with Antonio. It's in your office, study, whatever you'd like to call it, the room where you do your work in, Antonio.
Okay.
How would Antonio decorate a piece of business that was his?
He probably tries to imitate the European feel. So it's done with the expensive woods from out in the rainforest, dark woods. He has books, probably map around. I don't see him as much of a hunter, so it doesn't have like dead things hanging on the wall or anything. But he probably does consider himself a bit of a cultured man. So he has some paintings up exclusively Europeans. nothing from the native culture. And he has beautiful furniture, and he is pretty much consistently smoking one of his opium-laced cigarettos.
When Barbara comes in, and well, actually, she's the nanny. Do you have children, or is she looking after some sort of young cousins or something that live in the house?
You think it'd be interesting to say that maybe I'm a widower? I do have a young daughter, probably somewhere in that 6-year-old range.
Right. Okay. So yeah. So then Barbara is your daughter's nanny. Yeah, she's a young black woman originally from Pernambuco State, so not a peasant, but certainly from a poorer part of the country. And when she comes in, she has that sort of formal Victorian dress, the one, the highish collar, and hands clasped in front of her. She looks nervous. And what sort of state are you in? Are you actually working, or are you just smoking opium-laced cigarettes? Or
I'm probably working. I probably got something on the desk sitting there, going over books, probably.
She doesn't even look up at you, actually. She just says, "I'm very sorry to disturb you at your work, Senor Antonio."
Yes, Barbara, what is it?
Well, you see, sir, if it's not impertinent, I wonder if I might ask for an advance on my wage for this month. You see, is it impertinent, sir?
It is not impertinent to ask, Barbara. Asking is fine. Why would you need this advance? You're paid quite regularly.
Well, it's to do with my family, sir. Back in Pernambuco, they've come into some dire straits recently, and I'm afraid they need me to send them some money, sir.
Barbara, it always seems that there's some troubles, isn't there? Well, let no one say I'm not a kind and generous man. I can do this for you, Barbara, but it is not something that we should be in the habit of now, is it?
No, sir, and I promise I won't ask you again. But thank you, sir.
Of course. I suppose I'll arrange for that to be said.
Yes.
You will have that by the afternoon, Barbara.
She gives you a deferential nod and backs out of the room and closes the door behind her. So there you go. That's a simple dramatic scene. And what I wanted was, I guess, a show of mercy, perhaps, and to arrange for the advance. And actually, I should have asked for a loan so that you'd have to spend wealth. But since I said an advance on wages, that won't really cost you any money. So let me just create
That's good business.
a token over to Antonio. So he's got 1, everyone else has got 0. And let's see whose turn it is to call the next scene. Oh, it's Antonio. So if you would like to tell us, where do we next see Antonio? Who is in that scene? What's happening?
I think probably it's nice to do a dramatic scene, and Fortunata, we probably should go ahead and establish a little relationship between us. How about we stay in the study? I've arranged or asked someone to have you come in and see me. Fortunata, please come in, my dear sister.
Are you still smoking?
No, but you could definitely smell that kind of flowery, tobacco-y smell around.
Mm-hmm. I come in. I'm dressed kind of finely right now, as a proper young lady should be. But I immediately go over to where you keep your cigarettes, and I open the case as if I'm just going to help myself to one.
Fortunata, you know that young ladies should not be smoking.
Oh, is that right? Why is that exactly?
Because, Fortunata, it is lower class.
But don't you smoke, Brother Antonio?
What men do is not the same as what women do.
And I pick one up and I am playing with it and thinking about lighting it.
And that comes to the real crux of why I brought you here, Fortunata. I've been hearing reports that you are once more going out amongst those people and enjoying their music, their company, their drinks,